Hello and welcome to The Time of Telling. I'm Mark Walker, and this podcast is based on my unpublished manuscript, The Time of Telling, John Starr Cook and the Word of One Tarot. Now, it's early January 1967. John Starr Cook, the American mystic and chief creator of the Word of One Tarot, is living in Cuernavaca in Mexico, a small village at the edge of the jungle. Cook was 47 and had decades of deep spiritual experiences in dozens of places around the world. In recent years, he had become an enthusiastic partaker of LSD, which he felt held great potential to create something positive for the future. In the early 60s, Cook's interest in the tarot and the Ouija board led to the creation of the Word of One Tarot, also known as the Books of T. He knew that these 22 new tarot images, these new archetypes of a new eon, had to be put out into the world. But how? At the same time, he felt that in order for mankind to evolve beyond the separateness of ego and its resultant wars, that there needed to be a great event which would lead to a mass change in consciousness, and that somehow he, John, was involved in making it happen. In 1965, John gave copies of the Books of T to Michael Bowen and sent him on a mission to inject them into the heart of the psychedelic movement and to somehow facilitate a great event, a historical marker, a moment in history to be studied and understood. So Bowen's first stop was Timothy Leary on the East Coast, but that was not where it was at. Now, in 1967, Bowen was in the Haight-Ashbury, an entire neighborhood in San Francisco overrun with newly named hippies. It seemed that this would be where the great event would go down, an event demonstrating unity at scale. Even the original Books of T themselves, John's 22 paintings, were now in the Haight-Ashbury, after John had brought them up from Mexico and handed them to Mitch and Rosalind. These talismans of the coming Aquarian age were now in the right place, and the right time was approaching. So while John was in Cuernavaca, like the old man of the mountain, Michael, the psychedelic ranger, was in the Haight. Now, Michael Bowen's studio apartment saw a steady stream of far-out folk. One of these freaks was a psychedelic shaman named Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown's trip, here's Charlie Brown from The Summer of Love by Gene Anthony. Charlie Brown's trip was on the symbolism of the Pentagon, and he drew inspiration from Lewis Mumford's The City in History. And a quote from that book: "A just and peaceful world will come after the Pentagon is destroyed." And so Michael Bowen decided that something needed to be done to put some positive energy into the defense of the US. And this is how it went down. Jerry Rubin visited Bowen at his studio, along with Max Scheer of the Berkeley Barb and other Berkeley activists. Martine recalls that Michael wanted Jerry to take acid. Martine and Jerry had, in 1963, been part of a contingent of 80 people who had travelled as guests of the Cuban government to Cuba. Martine had been deeply moved to meet the family of a soldier killed in the Bay of Pigs event not long after the fact, Upon her return home to San Francisco, she received a friendly visit from the FBI. And, as she discovered later, her passport was placed on a watch list. So, Alan Cohen was at Bowen's studio when the Berkeley contingent came over. Quote, this is Alan. I read this excerpt to Michael Bowen and Jerry Rubin, and I suggested we direct our energies toward the Pentagon to exorcise it in a magical ceremony. Michael liked the idea because he was into the theatre of politics and we were into the magic of living, and so the two ideas merged. And this is just a brief quotation from The City in History by Lewis Mumford, just to give you the flavour of the book. Quote, the Pentagon in Alexandria across the Potomac from Washington, an effete and worthless Baroque conceit. The dismantling of this regressive citadel will prove a far harder task than the demolition of earlier Baroque fortifications. So anyway, that's the flavour of The City in History, which Charlie Brown had introduced Michael Bowen to, and now Michael Bowen and Alan Cohen were putting into Jerry Rubin's head. Psychedelic Ranger Bowen ensured that Rubin was flying high on a large dose of LSD. And so the magical idea to exorcise the Pentagon was planted in his mind like a seed, a plant that would bear unusual fruit later in the year. In the first week of January, Oracle number 5 came out with the Bowen Mouse Sonnabend poster on the cover. At around this point, Bowen gradually turned his apartment over to the Oracle, which had hitherto been operating out of cramped conditions above the print mint. Michael moved, with Martine, to Stinson Beach, although he kept a small section in one corner of the apartment as a base for when he came to town. Now here's a quote from the Oracle describing the upcoming be-in. Quote, now in the evolving generation of America's young, the humanization of the American man and woman can begin, enjoy, and embrace without fear, dogma, suspicion, or dialectical righteousness. A new concert of human relations being developed within the youthful underground must emerge, become conscious, and be shared, so that a revolution of form can be filled with a renaissance of compassion, awareness, and love in the revelation of the unity of all mankind. The human being is the joyful face-to-face beginning of the new epoch. End quote. Bowen had penned a be-in press release for the 12th of January. Quote, for 10 years, a new nation has grown inside the robot flesh of the old. Before your eyes, a new, free, vital soul is reconnecting the living centers of the American body. On January 12, 1967 at 10 a.m. at 1542 Haight Street, behind the print mint, Gary Snyder, Michael Bowen, Jerry Rubin, Alan Cohen, Jay Phelan will entertain the press and answer questions about the gathering of the tribes for a human being on January 14, 1967 at the Polo Fields in Golden Gate Park. Berkeley political activists and the love generation of the Haight-Ashbury will join together with members of the new nation who will be coming from every state in the nation, every tribe of the young, the emerging soul of the nation, to powwow, celebrate, and prophesy the epoch of liberation, love, peace, compassion, and unity of mankind. The night of bruited fear of the American eagle breast body is over. Hang your fear at the door and join the future. If you do not believe, please wipe your eyes and see. End quote. According to Bowen, his advice from John for this press conference was to make use of flowers to soften the atmosphere. And so there was an overwhelming amount of flora. And Bowen said that even the hardened old press hacks were won over by the beauty and optimism of the love generation. Before sunrise on the day of the be-in, a large flatbed truck, which would serve as the stage, was driven to the western end of the polo fields of Golden Gate Park along with a generator. Dawn was bright and clear at 7:25. Shortly afterwards, Gary Snyder, Allen Ginsberg, Michael Bowen, and one or two others performed the Hindu blessing known as Pradakshina, where they circumambulated the polo fields whilst chanting certain prayers. The be-in would have a sound spiritual basis as an American Mela in the tradition of the Hindu pilgrimage, the Kumbh Mela. The be-in was scheduled to begin at 1 p.m, but by 9 a.m, people were already arriving at the polo field, and the 480 by 900 feet space steadily filled. Despite taking place in the middle of winter, the day itself was sunny and warm, allowing a full and colourful array of clothing to be seen instead of being hidden beneath winter overcoats. And Jane Kramer quotes, according to Michael Bowen, Mexico had generously exchanged climates with Northern California at the intercession of Bowen's Mexican guru in the interests of a thoroughly successful day. End quote. Bowen said later that it had snowed hard in Mexico. And here is another quote from Psychedelic Illuminations magazine. The scene that greeted new arrivals as they crested the last rise and looked down on the sunken field was mind-boggling. A seemingly endless sea of people, tens of thousands. This meeting was a baptism, not a birthday party. It was a calm and peaceful approbation, a reaffirmation of the life spirit, a settling of the waters. Fans, feathers, plumes and tusks, bells, drums, chimes and incense, pennants, banners, flags and talismans, beaded charms, oranges and carrots, balloons, flowers, animal robes and bamboo, flutes and baskets, folded hands, closed eyes, bright brow and smile, prayer cloth and shaman's stick. Nearly everyone with something in their hands, except the many small children darting through the human forest. End quote. Mitch and Rosalind attended the be-in. Although Mitch was certainly not underwhelmed, he had long been experienced. Quote, I was young, 24, but I had had my mind blown in a 3-month-long magic carpet ride in Tangier, and had a kind of distant perspective on things. I had found what I was looking for. The be-in was a peaceful and calm event and seemed to be just another spontaneous expression of what was going on. End quote. John and those with him at his house in Mexico sat for meditation. It was time to begin the be-in. Beat poet Gary Snyder sounded a conch shell at 1 o'clock to start proceedings. 4 hours later, it would be over. So laid out on the back of the flatbed truck, there were some old rugs, Indian cloth prints and pillows. And on those rugs, cushions and pillows, just like the people who came to the be-in and sat on their rugs, were Allen Ginsberg, Timothy Leary, Gary Snyder, Jack Weinberg, Michael McClure, Richard Alpert, Lenore Kandel, Suzuki Roshi, Jerry Robin, Rosalind Sharp, Michael Bowen, Martine Bowen, and Big Bill Fortner. Dick Gregory was unable to be at the Be-In because he had been at a fish inn to support Puget Sound Native Americans and was in trouble with the authorities at the federally rezoned waters. Snyder and Ginsberg opened proceedings with a Hindu chant, then Ginsberg chanted his peace poem, and then Hari Om Namah Shivaya. Michael McClure then accompanied himself on auto harp with his poem, It Is All Perfect. This is really it. After the spiritual foundations of the day had been laid, the MC, Buddha, emerged and the program of bands, alternating with speakers, began. Between the beginning and the end, there were scheduled several speakers limited to 3 minutes each, and 11 bands. However, it seems that 5 of the bands were too high to play. Quicksilver Messenger service began, and the music vibrated out into thousands of hungry ears when suddenly it stopped. It was discovered at once that there had been an act of sabotage. The power cables running between the generator and the flatbed truck stage had been severed. But it was within this enduring silence that the Be-In became itself. And this is a quote from Elizabeth Gipps from Psychedelic Illuminations magazine. Quote, "The wires were cut, and for a long while there were no speeches, no music, only the murmur of 25,000 people grooving with each other, with the sunshine, which had come in the midst of a rainy month, and with the manifest presence of spirit. It was so quiet. We knew that we were witnessing a massive blossoming of a new religion, in the literal sense of being tied together again. This religion would never have churches or temples. This was a religion based on individual freedom and respect. We dug each other's vibes and felt the coming together of an ancient family. Time dwindled to no point. Heart reached to heart in an almost soundless outpouring of love. So when the music and speeches, when the mantra and the rock resounded, it was an ecstatic exclamation point on a massive experience. Call it heaven or samadhi. It set the parameters for the whole movement during the Summer of Love. We had scratched through the surface of our separateness and recognized ourselves, our surroundings, all things as one. That afternoon, we truly became the love generation." End quote. So the cables were finally spliced back together and were thereafter guarded by the Hells Angels. Buddha, the MC, resumed the stage, directing all to sing Happy Birthday to Lenore Kandel. Then came the Grateful Dead, and as they were playing, a few people at first, and then a few more, noticed something mysterious in the sky. Was it a UFO? More and more people watched as the tiny speck of white grew larger. It was a parachute. A great crowd then followed the parachute as it came down at the eastern end of the polo fields, where there was a rugby game in play. The game was interrupted by the arrival in their midst of Steve, the Gemini twin, according to Bowen. Word soon arrived back at the Be-In that it was actually Owsley who had parachuted in, bringing with him 10,000 hits of acid. There was, however, plenty of LSD in circulation that day. Bear had released a brand new batch for the special day, White Lightning. After being in the business of making LSD for 2 years, largely for his own enjoyment and use, Bear and Melissa Cargill had hit the sweet spot. The product was not only very pure, but the dosage was now uniform, due to Bear having procured a pill pressing machine. The tiny white pills were getting reviews as the strongest yet. In addition, Bear had donated 75 10-pound turkeys, which were cooked by the diggers, who had also baked an enormous quantity of bread and circulated the resulting turkey sandwiches. Some of the sandwiches had a special seasoning of crushed white lightning, and these special sandwiches were given to certain people as required. In the circles of the Grateful Dead, the gig at the BN is one of some dispute. There was no desk recording made, and the only recordings of the songs they played are fragments from films shot on the day. It seems they played Dancing in the Streets. Big Bill Faulkner was dancing. Allen Ginsberg was dancing. Buddha was dancing. Charlie Brown was dancing. And then Jerry Rubin said his thing, fresh out on bail. Quote, "I'm happy to be here. This is a beautiful day. I wish today all of America could be here. I just came from the old world. The old world are places like jails, structures where a person cannot feel like a human being. End quote. The bands and speakers continued to alternate. Timothy Leary's famous statement made its debut. Turn on, tune in, drop out. Jefferson Airplane took to the stage, and as they played Melody of Coincidence, Dizzy Gillespie, the master jazz trumpeter, played along with them on his trumpet as he walked through the crowd. Here's a quote from the Oracle. "Barefoot girls in priests' cloaks, madras saris and corduroy, teenage braves stripped to the waist in a hot winter sun, folk singers charting mountain ranges in their imaginations, shamans and motorcyclists, lovers and voyeurs, mounted police and hippies, cowboys and Indians, blue-tinted feathers, black and white ringed tails hanging to either side of her beatific glance. A Chinese masked drum beater with 2 balloons rising red and blue, tethered to his yellow coolie hat." End quote. Numerous persons were present who achieved later fame or notoriety. The Doors were in town for a gig, and they attended, as did Bobby Beausoleil, musician and future murderer, who had been a fixture in the Haight with his top hat and his white husky Snowfox. Pamela Des Barres, the author, was there, as were actors Dennis Hopper, Harrison Ford, and Steve Martin. The 4 hours drew to a close, and Bowen took to the microphone. Hello, good. I would like to say a few little things for you and to you." He then expressed thankfulness for the day and his hope that there was no pain caused during the day. Quote, "I would ask you at this moment to realize that the sun is setting and our day is at an end. I would ask you to turn, face to the sun, and Allen Ginsberg, along with Gary Snyder, will chant the night." Quote. Bowen then implored people to open their minds and to keep them open before finishing with, "I would say this to all members of the establishment. We are happy and proud to have you in our brave new world." End quote. On the face of it, this is a curious comment to make. However, put simply, it is a reversal. By placing the establishment within our brave new world, we reverse the roles. By acting as the host, we control the narrative from that point forward. The flavour of unity lingers as a taste memory for all, but the recipe is ours. The passage of time proceeds from that moment with one consciousness as the foundation of a new unfolding reality. In addition, the term Brave New World invites comparison with the Huxley novel as a cautionary note on how to proceed together forwards, to beware of tyranny. Gary Snyder once again blew the conch shell to signify the end of the event, and Allen Ginsberg led the chant Om Shri Maitreya for some time before the final act of the day by Ginsberg, quote, "Now that you have looked up to the sun, look down at your feet and practice a little kitchen yoga after this first American Mila. Please pick up any refuse you might see about you. Shanti." End quote. The entire vast meadow was left perfectly clean, without a single trace that 30,000 people had spent their day there. Afterwards, there was a gathering at Bowen's apartment. Ginsberg made it back there along with Snyder and numerous others for a macrobiotic supper. In Jean Anthony's Summer of Love, he quotes, "Bowen, who had just come running into the room with a telephone in his hand, called to Ginsberg that he had Mexico on the line. In Mexico, they meditated with us for 6 whole hours while we were at the BN. He handed the phone to Ginsberg, who spoke briefly with John." So, Bowen's idea of a sneak attack of overwhelming force, a big splash, had come to pass. The creation of the BN was certainly something positive for the future. But was it the great event? And that's where we'll leave it for today. Thank you very much for watching. This is the time of telling.